Hello, class. Today will be a short lecture in which we would be looking at an example of a visceral autonomic reflex. Here we have the micturition reflex. This is a reflex which is an autonomic spinal reflex, a type of visceral autonomic reflex where it allows us to urinate. Because of this reflex, we can pee in simple terms. So, what happens in a micturition reflex? The first thing that happens in a micturition reflex is that on our urinary bladder, so where the urine would be generally stored, there would be a stretch, okay? Stimulus of stretching will occur, okay? The stretch, which is our stimulus, will occur at the urinary bladder. Here you have the receptors detecting it, in this case on the ureter that surrounds the urinary bladder, detecting such stimulus. Now, when that stimulation is detected by those receptors here at the urinary bladder, you will have the signals being sent to the central nervous system. So eventually, it was sent here to our brain, um, and to be eventually processed by the sacral segment of the spinal cord. So urine stretching is detected, urine is filling up, information sent here to the central nervous to be processed here at the sacral segment of the spinal cord, so our very spinal cord, which is part of the parasympathetic nervous system. And once that is then processed, it so basically negative feedback. So if one thing happens, the opposite occurs in order to respond. So in this case, if there is a stretch in the urinary bladder, it will result to a negative feedback where we want to decrease that stretch to something smaller, and that is obviously by urination. However, not all the time we have to, just pee. We can't just pee whenever, wherever we want. We have more voluntary control and when we want to urinate. So under our skeletal muscle control, so the external urethral sphincter, so the one that we can actually control, so here, so the urethral sphincter, which is found in both male and female organs, basically we would have that under voluntary control. However, if the urinary bladder stretches too much, basically your voluntary control under the external urethral sphincter with the skeletal muscle, which is the external urethral sphincter, it disappears and you just urinate. Okay, so your urinary bladder detrusor muscle with it will contract, causing the internal urethral sphincter, which is the smooth muscles in here, not the skeletal muscles over there on the outside, the external urethral sphincter, it will just basically open. Okay, so internal urethral sphincter open, causing the release of urination. So in summary, we have our micturition reflex, which is an autonomic spinal reflex with effectors such as smooth muscles, cardiac muscles, and glands. So visceral autonomic reflex, basically. Urine is detected, causing this stretch. Information is then integrated, processed through the sacral segment of the spinal cord of the parasympathetic nervous system. We then have this negative feedback homeostatic response of basically, reducing that stretch into, reducing the size of that big stretch of that urinary bladder to something, more aligned to its more regular size, so smaller. So that would be under voluntary control of urination through our skeletal muscle with the external urethral sphincter. And when that happens, the internal urethral sphincter opens, causing those smooth muscle, to open, allowing you to urinate. So the effector, a simple way to understand this is that this is, okay. So here's the urethral sphincter, okay? for example. So this one is obviously the external, and this one is the internal. So this one is the smooth, the one we don't have control, and this one is the skeletal muscle, so the one that we do have control, the external. And because of, opening those, that will allow us to urinate. Okay, and don't forget, the urinary bladder has the detrusor muscle that will also contract in the process, which will allow you to urinate. Okay, so one last thing is that both the internal urethral sphincter and the detrusor muscle are smooth muscles, okay? Because that could be a good question someone might ask on an exam. So yeah, so the urinary bladder with the detrusor muscle and the internal urethral sphincter, those are both smooth muscles. The only one that's not is the skeletal muscle on the external, not the internal, the external urethral sphincter. Okay, I hope that gives a more simplified take on how urination work through the micturition reflex. Oh, sorry, the micturition reflex. If that was a lot to take in, you can try to maybe rewatch this video or watch it a bit slowly and go through the steps. And yeah, well, I hope that gives a bit of understanding, and see you on the next video.